Sit down. So, hello, good evening. My name is Guy Opperman. Thank you for coming first and foremost. Let me do some housekeeping. So, as you know, as a matter of law, you don't have to wear a mask at this stage on this day, but we strongly encourage you to do so. It's entirely your choice. There's no obligation to do so, but we encourage you to do so. I wouldn't take your coat off because we have that door open. Those windows and the windows at the back are open, and we're trying to keep this place as ventilated as possible. We're going to adjust temperatures and things like that. Liz, can you keep the door open, please? Do you mind? That's got its first there for a reason. We are trying to keep the air flowing through as much as possible. So just dealing with the COVID things, in the last two ones we've done, we ask you to keep a mask on, and then when you're speaking and I'll call you for your questions or particular points, I'd ask you then just take your mask off and then put it back on later. It's entirely your choice. I can't make you do it at all, but we are in a closed space. We've split you all up. We've got ventilation as best we possibly can. That's what we're trying to do, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing, let me just try and explain the format of tonight. So there are three main purposes of what we're trying to do. The first purpose is quite clearly to ensure that everybody gets the compensation they deserve, all right? And that comes in a variety of different ways. But the simple point is that the main focus is on NPG and ensuring that everybody gets that particular compensation. That is a work in progress. So I'm fully aware that there are plenty of you who come along tonight who've either written to me or have written to and contacted NPG, and either you've got a check in the wrong name or the wrong figure, or else there is a dispute on the particular sums. We will go through that, and I'm going to explain how we're going to do that in a second. I'm not going to deal with each and everybody's individual complaint, because I have got quite a lot, but I'm going to try and group them all together. If at the end of the evening, when we get to more open questions, you feel that's unfair or you feel you haven't been heard or whatever, we will definitely try and give you the chance. We've got 2 hours to do this, all right? But by and large, I'm going to try and group them together and explain how we do that. So we have done 2 of these meetings before, and very much the way in which it has worked extremely well in the previous 2 meetings is that we have Victoria, who's going to stick her hand up, who's in that corner there, and Chris, who's actually on chair duty at the moment, who work for MPG, and they will deal with your individual particular question, because it is quite true that all of us sometimes struggle with computers if we have electric. We struggle to actually get through, and some of your questions have not been answered as yet. So if you want a one-on-one session with someone and say, look, I live at this house, you haven't contacted me, or you're in a position that you have not in any way responded to my email or whatever it is, or it's in the wrong name or the wrong amount, they will particularly take that up, and they will stay for the duration of this evening. So at the end, I would urge you to sit down and have a chat to them. Normally we'd do that at the start, but because we're having to share with tonight with the vaccination centre, we weren't able to do as much one-on-one beforehand. So my apologies for that. If you have to go at 8 o'clock, then we will very much allow you to follow it up. They've got the details, and you should have on the desk in front of you a particular contact line. And obviously my office are helping literally dozens and dozens of people on an ongoing basis. So very much we will deal with individual concerns about what I would call the sort of 4 or 5 key mistakes, problems, difficulties that have occurred. We'll try and explain how it is the compensation system is working, what you get your £140 for, when that kicks in, how it works, etc., etc. There are some people who come tonight who have specific issues with water and with phones. I will try and address those as well, and there's a separate system that applies for that. Okay. So the main thing is we are here to try and help you and your friends and neighbours and anybody in your community who has not been paid. That's the fundamental thing. This isn't a gotcha exercise. So this isn't an opportunity to bash people, but it is an opportunity to actually find out what happened. And you've got the main people from NPG, Northumbrian Water, the local authority. You've got representatives here who can, one of your kind of councillors is here. You've got representatives who can try and explain who did what and when through this process. Now, plenty of us, trust me, we've all got some criticisms of what happened, but at least you will have it explained to you how it is people took decisions and why they took the decisions and why things broke down. And that is very relevant, and we want to try and make sure that even if you're not happy with the process, at least you understand it better. The key thing also is, I'm pleased to say, and we've done 2 of these meetings in Ponteland and also in Bellingham, there are already things being done. And so it is a fair point to make, particularly with NPG, and Paul is going to talk on behalf of them, but also with Northumbrian Water, with Forestry England. All of these organisations, some are public sector, some are private sector, are already learning lessons and already changing things. And it's good that you know what they're changing on an ongoing basis. Okay. Now, there are a variety of inquiries that are going on. So there is a Department of Business inquiry. There is an Ofgem inquiry, and Ofgem are the independent regulator. They're set up under previous governments. They're independent of government. Their job is to assess this particular disaster and how it is we can be more resilient going forward. And they have very robust powers to compel NPG in particular to do things and invest in a different way, change the way they're doing things. And that is an independent inquiry. This is being live streamed to them. So there are various people recording this, but if you're particularly interested and want to see one of the previous ones, it was more of a rural one, to be fair. Then we did the event 2 weeks ago in Bellingham. That's on my website, on my YouTube. You can watch it all. And that was much more about places like Kielder and seriously remote complications up there. But it was also, the problems are pretty much the same wherever you are. The storm didn't really discriminate in terms of rurality or urban nature. But this has been live streamed to Ofgem, who are literally taking notes as to the point being made. The really key point that we're trying to achieve is we are 300 miles from London. We are a long way away from decision-making powers sometimes. The beauty of this is that our voice will be heard and is being heard at this very moment in Ofgem, and so that you genuinely get your representations forward. Now, at the end of this, I'm going to also write a paper to the Department for Business, to Northumberland County Council, and also to Ofgem, setting out what I hope is a fair description of everybody's views and some of the problems that were happening, some of the difficulties that occurred, and what changes we would like to see. Ultimately, different organisations are going to look at things in different ways. There is also a Northumberland County Council Scrutiny Committee, and we'll talk about the local resilience and how the Local Resilience Forum works in a second. But the Northumberland County Council Scrutiny Committee then makes the recommendations on a local level as to how the Local Resilience Forum works. So there, very much, I hope that the third part of it is that we do what's happening to change things already, what has happened in the last 2 months, putting it bluntly, what lessons have been learnt already, and what further recommendations would we all like to see. Okay. I'm going to try and then introduce, and the way we've done it before, and it has worked pretty well, is I'm going to allow the 2 major people who you come to hear to tonight, Northumbrian Power Grid and Northumbrian Water, to outline what their position is, where they are, and I'll let them say their piece, and then I'm going to turn to and address specific questions that we're dealing with. The sort of grouping of the questions, just so you know I'm going to come to it, I'm going to do a sort of generalised specific losses, which will address things like how is the £140 calculated, when does it kick in, what does that pay for in terms of like freezers, hot food, lost things in particular events of the storm. Secondly, we'll talk about any problems on names and problems of that people have not contacted back on, things like that, and any other specific things. I've got about 20 individual questions that I've got in advance. Richard, who I'll come to in a second, and Mike have given me a number of other questions as well. I'm going to try and group those together, okay? We'll move on to what I would call how it is that the major incidents, how the Local Resilience Forum was set up, how that then progressed. And you can hear from Rick, who is here from the Northumberland County Council, to sort of explain how that works, and also Army getting involved, when they got involved, and things like that. And I will then also specifically have what I would call a water section, where we'll deal with particular water problems. All right. To the best of our ability, we will make sure everybody's issues gets heard. There will be a bit at the end where I will genuinely say, look, if you haven't heard, we haven't dealt with your point, stick your hand up, we'll come to you, and we will deal with your particular points. Richard in particular has given me about 15 points. I'm not going to deal with each and every one, but I am most definitely going to let him come in on those particular points. There is a final thing, is that where there are particular resilience issues going forward, I will try and address those as well. Some of those are not for national power grid or for the Hungary Water. Some of them are for government, things like how do you have a long-term phone system that works with or without electricity? How do you get a sort of resilience hubs? I know that I think the chair of Great Whittington Parish Council is here, and I've got your question, and I can tell you in advance that it is very clear that we want to try and create localized hubs which have access to a working landline, which is copper-based, and the ability to get outside connection, which have localized generators, which have a food supply, which have all the things that we know did exist in some places, but we want to have a much smaller basis, so that whether you're in Kielder or Great Whittington or wherever, frankly, there are small localized hubs that people can then go, well, I know that place is actually an emergency centre I can go to. And there is a plan to address that, but I'll talk about it in a bit more detail. So enough from me. I'll share it. I hope you can all hear me at the back. Is that okay? You're okay? I have a rather antiquated microphone system, which, this is done on a relative budget. This is a karaoke one. There's no songs, I promise you, but and it does work if we need to. Don't worry about the songs. But Paul, as we know, is quite softly spoken, so we're going to have to see how he gets on. If you can't hear him in particular, and I'm not having a go at him, then please say, and we will force him to use the karaoke mic, and we'll see how we get on. But I'm going to try and persuade him to shout. What I'm going to do is I'll ask, Paul's going to stay up here because no disrespect to everybody else, but the main focus of attention is MPG. From an electric point of view, that's who you really want to speak to. But I will then call other people up and they'll address you from the floor. They brought quite a lot of people with them who are specialists in linesmen and things like that, and specialist water engineers, so that you've got an understanding of that. If those particular questions come up, we'll bring them up. So, Paul, do you want to start off, give your 5-minute overview?
Okay, thank you, Guy. I've got a little bit of a cough as well, so we'll see how we go. My name is Paul Glendinning, and I'm the Policy and Markets Director at Northern Power Grid. I've got some colleagues here with me helping out tonight. I've got Matt Preston, who's the General Manager in this area, the North East. And I've got Graham Hodder, who's the Regional Faults Manager. He's going to say what went on in the storm. Guy's already spoken that we've got Victoria Dunn at the back there and Chris Mitchell, who are going to take your questions and write the notes down that we need to get back into our systems. And I've got Ian Miller with us here on the right, who's our Head of Innovation, who is going to talk a little bit about, with people, questions come in about these resilient hubs that we're thinking about and how that's going to work. Before we get into the story, can I just point out the two pieces of paper that we've put into everybody's seat? One's a little bit about the compensation and the welfare support payments, which I think really is we're in the common's tail of the story, and that's where we need to be focused in to make sure everybody's compensation is correct and their welfare payments is correct. And the other one is an inquiry form so that we can capture your details and put you into the customer relationship database. So the first thing that I want to say is we are here to listen. We need to learn some lessons and work out how to do things better in the future. We're already doing that, and I'll pick up a couple of things that we've started already from the incidents of the storm. As we drift further and further away from that weekend, the last weekend in November, we start to forget how bad the weather was on that weekend. And just sort of put it into slight, give a context from where we are. The Met Office warnings went quickly from yellow to amber to red. And when the storm came onshore, around about the Bamborough area, it came right through our region. And basically, because the wind was from the north, and there was a little bit of trouble in the press about somebody saying the wind was from the wrong direction, which caught everybody out a little bit. What he was really saying was that because the wind came from the north, which is unusual for our country and particularly our region, we normally get it from the west, and it brought with it very, very dense air, cold, dense air that was forming ice on our wires. So we had two stories. One was very high winds, and just to give you an idea, our system that fell over basically in the storm is designed to around about gusts of 75 miles an hour. We were getting 98 miles an hour measured, and the 75 was transgressed throughout the next 2 days, preventing us from getting a helicopter into the air to do some reconnaissance. So it was very, very windy. I think everybody in this room will know that. But the other thing that some people are not getting yet is where our wires, I'm sure you drive around and you see our wires is about as thick as my finger, some of them as thick as my thumb. When we were picking up the wires off the floor, we found them with 6 to 8 inches of ice around them, which is called ice accretion. And this was a real issue. This was snapping what was brand new poles, because whenever we get a situation here where we get a lot of asset damage, and in some parts of the region, it wasn't asset damage by a tree being lifted up and clearing our lines out. We did have that, but we had asset damage by ice forming on the wires and bringing the whole system down and just sending it across. Because the wind came from the north, and we tend to live in the northeast in valleys. We've got 8 river valleys in our region, and the lines therefore run up the valleys east to west. And so it was incident right across at right angles and blew it all. That got us to a position on the Saturday and Sunday where we had 280,000 customers off. And our contact centre was overwhelmed by the contact, and our website went down. We've got 360 phone lines into our contact centre. People were on the phone, and I'm sure that there's stories in this room of 6 and 8 hours, and we understand that. And a real problem. And also, given the new digital world of WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, emails, and websites, we were getting bombarded by potentially the same customer in 3 or 4 different channels, and that sat our systems down. To give you an idea about the phone calls, on the second day we had 22,000 phone calls that got through. Our average daily phone loading is 850 calls per day. So it was demand of a massive scale that weekend, and our systems fell over. And that is one of the first lessons learned, that we, even for Storm Barrow, which didn't actually affect that much, it did affect us, but it didn't affect us that much. We had a new website ready to go live for Storm Barrow, which would have put a holding page at the front. You might have seen that before, where you go on the website and it will tell you your waiting time is 6 minutes on the website. That stops it from going down. So we had that set up, a new front page is set to send messages on the website that people could read their postcode when we were likely to get that. The way in which our fault reporting system works is that it comes through algorithms. So when a fault happens, you might get a message to say, we expect for a fault of this nature, your house to be back on in 2 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, and it works it through, and we're right most of the time. In this case, one of the things that went wrong is when the system was inundated to that level, with 280,000 people off, what we were saying is you'll be on in a couple of days. What we found was that was right for 90% of our customers. That still left about 30,000 that were off for another week. And it was that piece of information that was being transferred on our website that we couldn't easily say if you were still off on the Monday when you'd be back on. And we do have absolute lovely people in this room, knowledge of people who have said, you told us on the Monday it would be on the Tuesday, then guess what? You told us on the Tuesday it would be on the Wednesday, and guess what? You told us on the Wednesday it would be back on the Thursday. So by the Tuesday afternoon in the contact centre, which I was involved in a meeting, what we said was we need to stop this, because the best thing to do is to give information, even if it's scant information, that's correct. So we formed 2 lists. We formed list 1, which is these postcodes will be worked on tomorrow, and there's a fair chance, some of those were optimistic in hindsight, there's a fair chance that you'll be on tomorrow night. If you're not in that postcode list, you're still in what we were describing as the fog of war, that we haven't worked out when that would be done, but we knew it was going to take time. By the Tuesday lunchtime, that when people were still off, we realised that we had about a week to 10 days work left, and we started to say to people when we could get through, when they get through to us, when our outbounds were landing. please start looking for alternative accommodation because you're going to be off for a long time. And throughout that week, we were booking hotel rooms. I think 1,400 hotel rooms were booked. People did move out to hotels in the region, but there were some people that couldn't or didn't wish to move out, and we were trying to sort them through different ways. We set up rest centres. I think the one that you might have seen on the television was up at Weardale, where we had hot food centre with hot food van and electricity on, a mobile phone set up, and that's where Minister Hands came and Kwasi Kwarteng came, Secretary of State, on the Sunday to see the devastation in the Weir Valley. Now that's not up here in Northumberland. We had a slightly different story. In the Weir Valley and in the Tees Valley, we had devastation. Everything was down. We had to rebuild 65 kilometres of overhead line in 7 days, and we did it by the use of the what's called new SAC arrangements, which is the sharing of resource. We had people from Dublin, we had people from Belfast, we had people from East Anglia, we had people from Bristol travelling up, and you probably would have seen if you were around some of the vans that were there. So that tripled our workforce on the ground to get this back, to get the system back up. In Northumberland, the issue was that a lot more hamlets were off, smaller places. So we had another issue, which was sparsity. So in the last 2 days, the last people on were in Northumberland, and like the people in this room. We had 400 linesmen in vans to get 400 customers back in the last 2 days. That was the sort of scale of the work. As soon as that work was over and people were back, I believe we're still waiting for some forestry maps. Is that right? We're just finishing the College Valley now. The College Valley up at Kielder, we're just finishing some overhead line work there. But in essence, everybody was back by the following Tuesday night. Once that had happened, the meetings that were held in our boardroom was around, let's get this compensation out, particularly because it was December as well. We knew that there was a milestone, and because we knew there'd be a lot of vulnerable customers that really needed that cash for Christmas. So we worked very, very hard to get that compensation out. There's a couple of things that I'd ask you to bear in mind there is, one, normally we have 90 days from a fault to get the check to the person that was affected. And in that 90 days, what we do is we run computer systems, we work out when they were off, we get our SCADA data in, we have teams of engineers, they work out when they were off, exactly that time, to when they were back on, and then they work out the payment. We tried to run at pace. We got 24,000 checks out to be cashed before Christmas. And roughly speaking, 7% of those 24,000 have had a problem. And Guy's already mentioned a few of the problems, which I'm sure there'll be some in this room, where the check went to the previous owner, or there was a spelling mistake in somebody's name, they couldn't cash the check, or there was a clear dispute that we sent somebody, I think in one case we sent somebody £280 because our records said it wasn't in this area. Our records said that they were actually back on at 10 o'clock on the Tuesday night, but they were back off again at 6 o'clock the following morning. They'd gone to bed and didn't know. And the whole of that street were claiming that they were off the whole week, but they weren't. So in that case, we went with the customer and said, right, we'll go with it that you were off the whole week. We've tried to be as lenient as we possibly can in putting that compensation together. If I just pick up for another 2 minutes, if I may, guys, sure. The lessons that we're already put in place. First thing is new website with cloud-based server. So that what we actually did in the storm was we were taking servers off other telecom systems and bolting them to our server to make them in parallel to get more and more server space. We're going to the cloud, and that will give us an infinite server space, and therefore the website should never go down. That's being designed now. It should have been in 3 months ago, but it will be in at the end of Q1 and be tested by Q2. So that's the first lesson, that we'll handle website comms better. The second one is that our automated telephone system is being improved, and there's a new system going to be in again, end of Q1, Q2, that will help with the postcode map and the algorithms associated with what we should say to people. So when you ring in, it'll be able to capture your details, work out who you are from your mobile phone number or your information that we give you, and tell you a bespoke message according to that postcode data. So those are the first two things. There will be inevitably questions around the network and whether it was designed correctly, and whether it was built correctly, maintained correctly, and upgraded correctly. All the indications are, in this case, that was not the problem, but we're going through inquiries, as Guy mentioned now, one with Bays and one with Ofgem, where all of that will be tested. But the main lessons that we're picking up on at the moment, and why we're doing stakeholder engagement to find out whether others, is getting through to us and giving you better messages, having a website that we can update and give everybody a list of when they're going to be back on, and hopefully improve where we are in the future. I'll take it from there.
Thanks, Paul. So in terms of specific compensation points, as I said, Victoria and Chris will deal with your individual ones, and I'm going to get Paul to wrap up a few of the ongoing ones and just give an overview in a second. But I'm going to ask Ross to speak on behalf of Northumbrian Water, and this particularly applies, you may not have been off, but there were certainly places, Slaley in particular, and other communities where water is powered by electricity, that there are a whole raft of problems that occur with that. And obviously in Bellingham and in Allendale in particular, which we're doing tomorrow night, there is huge issues in terms of stock, and a cow needs about 10 gallons of water a day. So if you haven't got your water troughs being filled, it's really complicated trying to run a farm. So Ross, do you want to come on up and come over there, if you would, and introduce yourself, introduce the team, and I'll give you your sort of 3 to 5 minutes.
Sure, thanks very much. My name is Ross Smith. I'm Partnerships Manager at Northumbrian Water, and thank you very much to Guy for organising these meetings and for everyone who's getting involved, because it's really important that we learn the lessons and see how we can provide better resilience in future. The main challenge that we faced during Storm Arwen was the loss of mains power to about 55 of our assets. That includes water treatment works where we process the water to get it to the quality that's needed to distribute to houses, and pumping stations that we obviously rely on to move that water around the network. And we were hindered in responding to that by 2 things. One was the impact on communications networks, which meant that we didn't have the visibility of the kind of data as to what was happening in our network that we would normally have. And obviously the difficulty of being in touch with customers to understand what was happening on the ground. And the second challenge was around access. With the weather conditions, with the impact of the storm, getting access to sites or to customer properties in order to respond to those issues was clearly very difficult. What we did in response to that, we deployed about 40 backup generators in order to get power operating again at different sites and around different assets. And for those customers who were out of supply, we distributed about 5,000 litres of bottled water to different parts of the region that were affected by that. We pride ourselves on our record of minimising interruptions to supply for customers. We've got the best record in the industry for that, but we know that many customers were affected by the extreme scenario that we faced in Storm Arwen. As with Northern Power Grid, we have a regulatory system of statutory standards of service and compensation that's applied if those aren't met. We're currently working through the data to understand who was off, how long they were off, the reasons that had caused that. And once that's complete, then those compensation payments will be applied automatically to customer accounts. There are a few lessons that we learned through our response to Storm Arwen. I think one of those is around having the right, considering whether we've got the right type, the right location, the right number of generators in order to respond to an event of this sort. So that's what we're looking at and considering. In terms of the distribution of bottled water, what we found on an event as widespread as this, where those needs were in multiple different locations across a wide area, where that worked well was where we were able to form partnerships with community representatives such as parish councils And that's a model that we'll look to, I think, implement from the outset in similar events of this type in future. And we also managed to put in place a good system of responding to issues for farms in particular, as Guy's alluded to. So many properties and an awful lot of farms aren't actually our customers. They have a private water supply, but that is again powered by pumps. So while they're not our customers, we have the opportunity to be able to respond and to help them out. We worked with the fire brigade and the NFU to be able to do that, and created a model around that, which hopefully we can deploy again in similar events of that kind. And lastly, just I think there's a few people who we just need to probably say thanks to for their work during Storm Arwen. Obviously, our own people, many of whom live in the communities that were affected, so they did a tremendous job in many cases while they were suffering from the same situations that many of you were. But our partners who we work with, including the emergency services, and we have a really good partnership approach to this. But probably most of all to our customers, who we appreciate were in very difficult and very trying circumstances, and were by and large very patient and very supportive with our people, and we really do appreciate that. I'm joined by some of my colleagues here today, so Jim Howley and Richard Irving from our Water Networks team, so they'll be able to answer any questions about the detail of what was going on in the network at the time, and Rachel Nelson from our customer team, who again will be able to deal with particularly any individual issues that people want to pick up with us, perhaps at the end of the meeting about your own circumstances. But we'll obviously take any questions when we come to that later.
Okay, Ross, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think there's 2 points I'll add on top of what Ross is saying. Is that you may think that we're just going to talk about electrical power and how we deal with that. The truth is, pretty much every public service depends on electricity, and there is a whole bunch of resilience planning, not just that we're all going to do in our own houses. Trust me, a lot of people are buying generators right now, but also what MPG are going to try and do is that they get their system ready and able to deal with major weather events in the future. But also, let's be blunt, how, I spoke to Forestry England, I went to Kielder 2 Fridays ago, had a sit down with all the key players there, all the foresters, they didn't have any power. They're investing in generators themselves. Northumbrian Water, their main crisis centre lost power as well, so they can't respond, they don't know what's going on. So lots of different services are going to have to come up with, whether it's just the blokes are going to chop the trees down for you to try and get the roads clear, to the county council, to the water company. They're all looking at how it is they're going to do that. That's a work in progress, which we can feed in today. I'm going to particularly get Ross and his team to come back on Slayley, which was particularly badly affected. And I think that there's a fair point that we are pressing Northumbrian Water to look at where are the pinch points that have repeat problems. And it seems to me it is quite clear that Slayley has a infrastructure that is just not fit for purpose, and Storm Arwen that seems to be working well, and they really need to go away and have a look at that. So I will come to that. There may be others who have come along, either who've submitted questions. I know I've got questions from, I believe it's Ian and Colin from Slayley on that particular point, but there will be others who will want to make the case on that point. But I will get a sort of water question on that issue going forward. I will ask Rick to say a few words on behalf of the County Council. There is a handout from the Council which does answer some of your questions, which is this one here, which should be on your chair. Many of you have asked questions about, putting it bluntly, is there a plan to deal with these sort of things? What's the law and structure to deal with it? How do we know it's going to get better? Well, the simple answer is it's governed by a statutory act, 14 under the Blair government, approved, there's no politics here, it's approved by all governments since the 2004 Civil Contingencies Act, and that effectively sets up what are called local resilience forums. So there are effectively what happens at a major event. The best examples I can give you is Storm Arwen, which we all know about, that's all for sure, but also Storm Desmond, again, which we all know about, when you had water literally at the gates here. Tyne Green was flooded, Corbridge was flooded, many other places were flooded. And where there's a terrorist incident as well, or major incidents, the local resilience forum is basically all of the key players, from police to ambulances to they can call on military support and everything like that. And I'm going to come to the issue of why weren't the military called in earlier in a second. But most of the answers to that sort of question is contained in this 2-page handout. And if you want to read and criticise and have an input on the actual plan that is presently in existence in Northumberland, it is on the Northumberland County Council website under the Emergency Community Assistance Plan. You can go to it. And why that particularly matters, I'm stealing Rick's thunder slightly, is because the County Council have what's called a scrutiny committee, which is a cross-party committee at County Council, run by different county councillors, so there's no politics in it, which is analysing is the resilience plan match fit going forward. And to be fair, the Department for Business and Ofgem are also looking at this particular point, because self-evidently, 4 regions were hit by Storm Arwen. The North East, particularly County Durham and Northumberland, slightly into Cumbria. There was a small bit of Cumbria that was affected. Clearly, parts of Yorkshire were affected, and then the North East of Scotland, sort of west of Aberdeen, was very badly affected as well. That's 3 different power companies. That is 3 different regions, different devolved government in one place. They're looking at all of these things. What I want us to do is to make sure that we as a community are really well represented in that. But also, that will then feed into how you improve resilience plans. So Paul referred to I don't even know what it actually stands for, but it's called NewSat, which is effectively the electric company's resilience plan. And it's a really cool thing. So the bottom line is this, is if Northern Power Grid or a Welsh power goes down, every single power company is required by agreement to send all their engineers from across the country to go and help where the problem is. Which is why if you lived in Banbury, some very nice Northern Irishmen were fixing your electricity. If you lived in County Durham, there were a lot of Welshmen who'd come up to do that. Basically, there aren't that many linesmen who are capable of dealing with very, very powerful pieces of kit, which can kill you if you get it wrong. And this is not something that you or I or the Army or the County Council can fix. So they pool together all of the particular people. Now, can we make that better? I'm absolutely certain we can. And frankly, the specialists are looking at it, but we can feed it in. Rick, do you want to give us sort of a quick overview of anything I've missed? But also, do you want to quickly explain about what the scrutiny committee is doing as well and the timetable on that? Because I know it follows on from Ofgem and Department of Business.
Right, okay. Thanks, Guy. Good evening, everybody. Guy has stolen all my thunder, actually. The big question was, is there a plan? Well, we put that handout on the chairs there. I can take any questions you've got on that. The role of the County Council in instituting that emergency plan was twofold in this instance, in this particular emergency, was humanitarian help, looking after the care and welfare of you as residents and any visitors into the county, also the environment. So the first night the storm hit, we set up the incident control room, which was West Hertford Fire Station. We started putting teams in there. And by about day 3, we had about 50 people in the control room, coordinating the council's effort to help people in the community. We couldn't provide generators, we couldn't fix the power lines, but there were a lot of people in the community who needed help. They would phone in and ask what was going on, they'd be looking for advice. We would take out water to communities that needed water. The fire brigade is part of the county council, it's our fire service. They were delivering water to farms, etc. So we were coordinating all that response to try to help people. We targeted the effort on the vulnerable people. Clearly, as a council, we know there are a lot of vulnerable people in the community. We deal with them through social care. We've got lists from the GPs, etc. We targeted those people. We had people going out to talk to them, trying to get them on the phone, but usually couldn't because the phone lines were down, to try to see what help people needed. There was a lady in Lockleigh, for instance. She insisted to stay in a house. It went down to 2 degrees. The fire brigade went in, we lifted her out and took her to a safe place. So we're looking after people's safety. As the week went on, and I'll address the issue now of the army, if you like, and the major incident, there's a structure, the local resilience forum, which is generally in a severe incident chaired by the police. They handed that over to the council. And we then led the what they call a strategic control group. We constantly looked at the situation as it evolved. We have a lot of partners in the room at all times. The military are there, they're a standing member of the Resilience Forum. The police, the ambulance service, the Red Cross, the mountain rescue, everybody was participating in this. And we felt, as the incident unfolded, that we couldn't see a role for the military. The military don't have thousands of generators. If they did, we'd have got them in on day one and use the generators. They don't. We didn't see a role at that point for the military. As Paul described, as the week started to unfold, we realised that there was going to be a lot of very difficult problems they were facing. There was a lot of residents who were going to start to tip into vulnerability, and we needed to go and visit more people. That's when we realised we need more boots on the ground. Who's got lots of boots? The army. So we had a specific ask of the army, and they were therefore prepared. It has to be agreed by the Minister of Defence. They were therefore prepared to give us, I think at the height, we had 120 soldiers working out the control room with our staff, going out and visiting vulnerable people. Before that, we didn't see a role for the army. They didn't see a role for themselves, and we didn't feel that we needed them. But as the emergency unfolded, it became more clear that we did. I think I'll stop there, Guy. I don't have the timetable for the scrutiny committee. I think the first meeting's next month, though.
Yeah, I mean, I can. What we'll do is we'll put it on my website. We can find that out. But I know that the scrutiny committee, you can again watch it. It will be live, and there's a live feed. I'm pretty sure. I suspect it's going to be after the Chairman Department of Business reports, which is not a bad thing as well, because you then have government and the energy regulator giving their opinions, and there'll be an interim. They're going to do interim reports, as I understand it, probably, and that those two reports, my understanding, and it's slightly a work in progress, so don't hold me to it. My understanding, they will be done pretty much by the end of March. So the Ofgem are working at speed, partly because they want NPG and others to work at speed. There's a separate issue that I'll talk about in terms of phones later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to the nuts and bolts of your questions, and I'm going to ask Paul to address the basic compensation points. And so I think hopefully the handout that you've got on your chair explains the broad structure of how people get paid. But I know that some people, and I'm grateful to Hayley and to Richard for giving a large amount of questions, most of which I hope we could address. But I'm going to try and get you to answer three key questions, which is in terms of what's the time limit to get paid? So there will be some people who have not heard anything, and I want to try and reassure them on that. Secondly, and how do they contact? Obviously, I'd like them to contact at the back, but if they're not here, they can either come through me or there's other ways of doing it. The second point will be what's called the welfare payments. So I think we understand it's after 48 hours, you get your 140 a day. But what does the welfare payment cover, and what does that cater for? And the third point is, what is your approach to, I wasn't able in the middle of a storm to keep a receipt, or how do I prove something that your computer says no is slightly bogging them down with? Now, in broad terms, those are the three big issues, and I'm going to get you to address those three.
Okay, thanks for that, Guy. Right, start off with the compensation periods. So there's two points that I need to get everybody to understand. First, with the compensation periods. In the middle of the storm, there was a discussion that took place with network operators, CEOs, where they said it's going to be quite hard, it's going to be a difficult storm, so we're going to remove the £700 cap, and we're going to double the £70 up to 140 for the day. So the way in which it works when you get a storm of this size is that you get 48 hours to get the people back before the guaranteed standard kicks in. So you've got to be off in this storm for 48 hours. After the 48 hours, then you can start collecting the the £70 every 12 hours.
Okay, I'm just going to come in on one particular point there. The energy companies are regulated on this. So this is a Ofgem set this. There are some questions on this about, is that a fair compensation? Is that the right way forward? That is a matter for Ofgem as well, and that's a discussion that they are involved with. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's great. Just to put the compensation into context, because a lot of people think that they pay £2,000. Sorry, they do pay £2,000 for their electrical energy across a year, and I think that comes to us at Northern Power Grid. The most of that payment goes to the generators and the retailers. What Northern Power Grid get per customer per year is about £90. So if you're off for 3 days, you get your payment back and more. Just to put it in sort of context, that's how tough the guaranteed standards are for a company such as ours. Now, fair enough, we've got 3.9 million customers in the region, so it's not insignificant. So that's the guaranteed standard payments. But once you've been off 48 hours, then they start to ramp up. On our website, which is far too complex to describe here tonight, it tells you roughly what when you're off, at what point you start collecting the value, and it works it through. It's not easy to work it through. I certainly couldn't work it through here live tonight, but if we took it away, we could work it through for you. The maximum payment, about 1,820 was the maximum that we paid out, and the averages in Northumberland are in the 600 type area. That's the average. So that's compensation payments, and it's through the guaranteed standard, which was £700 cap removed, which in all the DNOs that were off, that affected Northern Power Grid the most. So you might read in Scotland, just across the border, they decided to give everybody another £150 on top of the guaranteed standard payments. We didn't do that for two reasons. We had the quantity of people that were going over the 700, which was a lot. And secondly, we decided to focus any additional payments into welfare. And Guy mentioned the welfare side of things and how you would claim for welfare. We either organised hotel rooms for people, or we suggested that they move to a hotel and kept a receipt and we'd call the hotels. We had hot food vans to provide food and hot drinks, and we set up rest centres in centres that were a lot of people off, that they could come in, use mobile phones, get warm, get a cup of tea and some food, and all that we paid for, the welfare side of it, which is not in the guarantee.
What about their costs though? Some people have got extra costs. That's the bit I want you to address.
And the extra costs being things like, just to give us an example.
Freezers,
Right.
buying hot food, going to get a generator, petrol costs, things like that.
So the first one,
What comes within the 140 and what is
Yeah.
separate?
So-
if they count that.
So the compensation, the guaranteed standards is for things like that we couldn't easily assess, freezer contents or damage in your home or paying excesses for insurance claims. That's the guaranteed standard payment. Welfare is about warmth, food and drink, and hotels. And generators where you hired a small generator or obtained a small generator to keep your heating system on or boil the old kettle, we would cover that, the cost of that as well. So that was into that week. That's welfare. And what we ask for is that you keep receipts where you can and put it into a claim for us. And just roughly speaking, we're about £500,000 that we've paid out for welfare at the moment, and we're about £9.5 million for guaranteed standards. So overall, we're heading towards 12 or 13 million.
Can you address the point where Mr. and Mrs. Smith don't have receipts, but
Yes.
say, well, I went here, but I just lost the receipt. What is your general approach? I'm not holding you to every single claim, but you need to try and give an impression of how it is you're going to deal with such cases.
The
And also the time limit, I need to know that.
time limit. The contact centre staff have a rules-based discussion with the customer, and they are being erring on the side of the customer all the way through. So, we've asked for things like, there was a lady in Darrow's Hall session that she came to me because she paid for Just Eat using her debit card, and she didn't have any receipts at all. What she did was she went to the bank and got the debit card receipts and put a marker pen on them, and we paid out in full. We're trying every way we can to get the money back to people that's had genuine hardship. The timescales, everybody can claim for 3 months.
Can I ask a question on this
Yeah,
particular
let him finish, and then I'll let you come in. Just let him finish, and then we'll do that.
The general timescales that we look at are 90 days, 3 months. So inside that window, then claims will be accepted. I've not heard anything yet to say that claims will be barred after 90 days in this case, but 90 days is the norm.
I'll come to you in a second, sir. I think the key point is twofold. If you've got an individual case, please take it to the dream team at the back. They have dealt with every kind of possible case that you can imagine at the last 2 meetings. And I accept that Hayley and Richard have brought in some extra cases or specific individuals. We're going to make contact with those. In terms of, I think you need to understand that there are still some people who have not been contacted, and we're 2 months on, and that the 90 days genuinely does not apply in those particular circumstances. One of the things I'm going to finish with is you've all got to go and make sure your mates, your family, your neighbours and everything like that are actually contacted. And we are continuing to deal with cases on an ongoing basis. But just so everybody is clear, it provided, because the obligation is on you to contact the customer, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So if you were,
we must know, guys, sorry for interrupting, that we don't have everybody's details. That's one of the big issues.
That is the fair point. So the 90 days is a broad rule, but it is not set in stone, is the point I want to try and get across to everybody. But clearly, the sooner we get on with it, the sooner you're able to prove it in the best possible way, the best we are. Right. I'll take the gentleman there. Yes, sure.
Yeah, I've got a specific question related to, I'm from Slade.
Okay.
I live in a new build house, which is this fabulous air source heat pump.
All right.
So everything in my property is electric.
Yes.
Heating, water, heating, everything. However, in Slade, we have a gas supply also. So I have a gas fire as a secondary source of heat. In order to get the fire to light, I need 240 volts because the control system is a 240 volt system. I've just spent 800 quid on a battery inverter backup power supply solution in order to be able to switch my gas fire on for the next time that you have a power failure. Where does that stand in the whole compensation side of things? Because it's not an expense so much as a capital investment that I've made to protect myself.
The brutal answer is it doesn't stand in any of the welfare payments. If you get a cheque for guaranteed, under guaranteed standards, then you could use that money in that way. But we don't cover the costs of people improving their homes for that type of upgrade, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly answer that in broad terms. Lots and lots of people are making a resilience plan and buying either a small generator. There are the very basic ones that don't do a lot, but they at least power a phone or do a kettle. And then there obviously is larger ones going forward. That is definitely what, I was off, no power, no water for quite some time. Everybody is beginning to look at how we all lived 20, 30, 40 years ago and how necessarily we may do so. So I don't believe that is covered, but at the same stage, have a sit down with the team at the back and we'll see whether we are on that. I'm going to grab a seat a second, Paul. I'm going to take, if anybody's got specific, I don't want to get too much embroiled into, can't claim for my freezer or whatever at this stage. But if anyone's got any specific points that they want to make on payments, I'm going to deal with this right now, or I can come to you later on. And the next thing I want to come to you is I want to just ram home the 24-hour point and how I think we're going to try and deal with that. Yeah, Richard, sure.
Can I just come in? I'm Richard Palmer. I'm the chair of the Storm Arwen support group. I think we've spoken before, Paul. I think one of the things that we're slightly raising an eyebrow at is the way that the welfare payments have been managed.
Okay.
We've got, first of all, it seems to be turning into a sort of pocket DHSS exercise where people are phoning up to make an argument for their particular compensation claim. Now, what's happening is that we've got ample examples of where initial discussions around claims are refused. When the customer then insists and then insists again, they eventually are agreed to be paid out. And that's fine, but it's creating a situation where those who shout loudest get paid. And those who are less confident and more reluctant to make a fuss, and who are often those who need help most, are not. So we request that you bear that in mind when you're making these assessments, because we're getting it from quite a lot of people at the moment, and people are being put off by this. They're proud people, they're in a desperate situation caused by this scenario, and they don't want to feel as if they're asking for charity.
No, it's a horrible story to hear that people are having to ring 2 or 3 times, because I've not heard that yet. What I've heard is that people are ringing up and saying, I want to claim 200 quid for X, Y, and Z, and they've got no evidence at all. And our call handlers are asking for evidence, and they're going away and getting evidence. But if it's worse than that, then if you've got any example, I'd like to run through it and try.
Well, Richard, what I'll ask you to do, so I'm not quieting you down, I promise you. What I'd love you to do is to give the specific examples. These 2 teams can take it through. I have no difficulty at all to do what I've done on several occasions, which is anybody can have a meeting on a one-on-one basis with MPG representatives where they can actually thrash out. And we've done 4 of these public meetings. I don't rule out, obviously, the team here are loving the idea of me taking another their Thursday and Friday evenings. I don't rule out going to other places and having sit-downs where there's real problems. Certainly, I'm aware that there are some places, Stannisburn has a bigger problem than I thought it did, for example, that we may have to address. So my urge would be, if you've got those specific examples, sit down with the team, have a one-on-one, and we can go through it in detail. That's sort of, I take it you will be very keen to do that.
No,
and that applies, I know you've got a number of groups who you have been looking after, which is wonderful. That applies obviously to any individual who wants to have a sit down with them as well.
Can I just say one thing, sentence, because one of the things that's cropped up is the obligation for us to pay isn't there in our license. We said we wanted to do that.
Oh, no, I'm aware of that.
Because of the scale.
We do appreciate that, but it's now it's been done. What we don't want it to do is to turn it into a public welfare.
No, I agree with that. We'll look into it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the 24 hours because I want to just nail this. So we have dealt. Sorry, yes, I didn't see your hand. Sorry.
Could I just raise an issue? It's not really specific, so I'll deal with Victoria or Lee or Chris afterwards. So it's not specific to me, but it's about my experience, and I'm sure a lot of people's experience here. And it's about your customer service. So obviously, I appreciate all the issues of not being able to get through for the first 2 days. When I did finally get through, I had a very patronising conversation with somebody who told me to look at a fuse box. The whole of the area has had a storm, and the young lady I spoke to in particular told me to look at my fuse box. Appreciate, I'm not an electrician at all. So I actually got to the point where she forced me to go and have a look at my fuse box, which I did. My husband looked at it, and there was no issue with fuse. And then we had a catalogue day after day of talking to people. I couldn't speak to the right person. Nobody could give me any information whatsoever. You did mention the fact that there was, you were promising, okay, it's going to come on another day. So I fully appreciate that. That continued all the way through until the point, and you can tell I'm not shy, and I'm certainly not a wallflower. So I got to the point where I was completely broken down. I have a mother who lives with me who's 92. I had a husband who had been in hospital in Halifax and all places because he was commuting at the time, and he had a heart issue, and so he was in hospital, and he returned home on the Friday with a swollen head. There was absolutely not 1 ounce of sympathy. Nobody told me. I'm new to the area, 2 weeks in. I had no idea of the services. Nobody contacted me and told me what to do. So I just took it upon myself to leave my family into a bed and breakfast. I think that the whole issue that you have a certain relationship with people that you could only contribute, because I got to the point where I have a little part-time job and I paid for the bed and breakfast for my family, but I got to the point where it's becoming very difficult to do that. And again, I was told that I had to move my family again, sick husband in bed, 92-year-old, 13-year-old daughter, 2 dogs, to somewhere else where you had a relationship where you could pay directly. And I'm sure there's millions of people here that have had worse stories. But if there's anything that I could actually share with you, is that if you tell the truth, if you actually speak to somebody and give them some kind of credit, they actually told me they didn't know my house existed. Absolute rubbish. I pay my electricity bill. So I just found the whole thing just exasperating. And the only reason why I came out this evening is just to try, because I did hear, apologies Guy, being part of discussion, but communication. Instead of putting a wall in front of us of people that don't know, at least give them the information so that they do know, or let them be honest and say, we don't know.
Yes.
We're doing our very best.
Can I just ask, what's your name and where do you live, just so we know?
I live in Whitfield and my name's Bronnie Woodstock.
So, can I make the point? Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I cannot overstate, I could give you 50 people at the previous meetings, if I asked someone else to stick their hand up who had been similarly affected. And slightly, I was coming to the 24-hour point because bottom line is the comms were woeful. Anybody who's experienced this, trust me, we were trying to get through repeatedly to MPG on behalf of 60,000 constituents, of which, nearly 10,000 are off. It's bad enough for us, and we're the main representatives. We all accept that comms are woeful. I agree with you. Many people were patronised. I've got plenty of evidence of that, and there's no doubt about that. And people were constantly told, hence the 24-hour point, you're going to be on in 24 hours because the algorithm says you're going to be on in 24 hours. Now, all of those, I think, how can I put this delicately? In the last two meetings, we've had very robust information, very similar to what you said. And there is a whole culture change that needs to take place at MPG. So it is a much more, to use the jargon, user-friendly, but basically human. And that it has to be less computer says no. And to be fair to them, they have problems getting their own people into work. So there is, half of the clientele, half of the staff are actually trying to man all the phones, which are going about 30 times as much as they should. But Paul, I think you better address that. I think you've got to explain how you're going to get better comms. You've got to explain how you're going to be more empathetic, bottom line, and also how can we get confidence in whether we all buy our power from you.
Yeah, no, I mean, in your example there, we have heard similar stories before, so I'm really sure you're not the only one, and we are trying to learn from it. We know that the first two things we've got to do is have a better website, because when the website went down, that brought more traffic into the call centre, because people were doing website looks, it was down, so they would ring, and the peak was astonishing. And it took till the Thursday on the website use to get it down to the previous, not normal levels, but the previous highest peak that we've ever had in our history. So it took 5 days to get down to that level. And we, when the website is better and we can put messaging up there that explains what's going on and where we are. Some of the don't know stuff, I'm not talking about your case here, but some of the contact centre, in fact, the executive and the senior managers, they didn't know either because we didn't know. So from the Friday night, we first got 4 helicopters in the air on the Monday morning, and it wasn't until 8 o'clock Monday night that the reports started to come in about the devastation. So there was a genuine situation where we couldn't tell anybody what we didn't know. And in your particular case, there's probably, out of the 208,000 that were off, there were probably some new bills, there's probably some people moved into the area that you genuinely didn't appear on our records. We don't have everybody's name and address, we mentioned that before, because it's your supplier that maintains. I don't know whether you're with EDF or Octopus or Allboss and whatever. They are the people that send you bills. We do not send you a bill, so we do not have your bank details, we do not have your name and address necessarily if you've just moved into that area. And round about 7 or 8% of the people on our list that were off, we didn't have contact details for. What we did do is we wrote a Dear Occupier letter, and out of the 5,000 Dear Occupier letters we sent, we've had 1,000 back, and we're dealing with those 1,000. And Guy mentioned that there would be people who haven't been contacted by us yet. If we have an email inbox which we're chasing through, we've got about 50 people working on this as a project at the moment to answer the compensation queries and work out when people were off and when they were on and getting them the right check. The engineering that goes on, if you imagine that we had, like in road networks type of description, motorways off, then A roads off, then B roads off, then C roads off, and then unmarked lanes to properties off, which we are mapping through and working out what claim should we have. That information, if it's a smaller situation with only 200 people off, say, then we know quicker what goes on. In this case, we just didn't know for 4 or 5 days. That's what we need to improve, and hopefully that'll improve our communications in them first few days.
I mean, there's also a wider data point. So we have a situation in this country where there are different people have data about different people, and how we mesh that together, preserve everyone's privacy, but share a sufficiency of information so the system works better, is going to be absolutely key. There is a functionality point of, so if you have a control room who's answering people's phones and they've got to go into the control room to actually man it, then of course, if they can't actually get out of their house because their trees are blocking them, suddenly you've lost 50% of your workforce already. Whereas what we've done in COVID in many government departments is now the phone line of the person who comes into work now goes direct in certain circumstances at the flick of a switch, hopefully powered by something that powers it. At a flick of a switch, it goes to a corporate phone, so they can actually be working and answering your questions. So at DWP, we bought 29,000 Surface Pro computers for people to work at home, so they can now process your claim from home where it's been suitably authorised. Which means, of course, in a Storm Arwen situation, they would have had 50% more people who probably would be a little less crotchety and a little less stressed themselves and have a much greater capability. That's the sort of lessons they learned. Being nice to people is something more fundamental, which has got to be done.
Guys, sorry, can I just jump in for 1 second?
Sure, I've got quite a lot I want to get on with, so quickly.
This is about vulnerable people and the priority register that you guys hold and the work the council did with their major incidents. So I'm sort of slightly raising an eyebrow when I hear how the council engaged with vulnerable people, because out of the 160 odd people who are part of our active members of our group, very few of them heard anything from anybody throughout the whole period. Now, personally speaking, we had the first visit from a fireman, I think 7 days after the incident had first happened. I think what Guy was saying, the problem is we don't have the data. We did not know who was vulnerable out there. Now you say that you've got social worker vulnerable lists, you've got GP vulnerable lists. The thing is there are heaps of people out there who were vulnerable, who were on the priority register, who got dropped off that register. Now you haven't got access to that register. NPG have got access to that register. Nobody could contact these people. The telly went down, the radio went down, broadband went down, the mobile phone network went down. We also have got some worrying reports that the emergency services network went down on the Friday night. Now, in that circumstance, do we not need to actually have, as part of the resilience plan, perhaps create a situation where you've got a network of volunteers who can work with your resilience hubs to go out to their neighbours to check that they're all right? Because this is where the problem was. This lady here, she's not on the vulnerability register. She won't appear on the GP's list, but she's quite clearly in a vulnerable situation. And then as that clock ticked for a week, 7 days, 8 days, these houses started to get very, very cold. And everybody was getting tipped into that vulnerable situation.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you there because helpfully the next thing I want to talk about is resilience. All right. So all of those points are valid. All of those points are being looked at by Ofgem, local authority as well. And I mean, there is seriously difficult, complex law around some of this because your and my data is actually something that belongs to us. And we've got to, there's only two ways this works, all right? Either government, and no government is popular when they start messing with people's data, trust me on that, doesn't matter who you represent. Either government says, we're going to do this with your data. Doesn't tend to work very well in my experience, and people get very stroppy about it. But you can try and do better stuff, or you do it on a local level. And so I think one of the things that the Local Resilience Forum and Department of Business are looking at, how can you get a system, because the Local Resilience Forum exists up and down the country. We have one in Northumberland, but there's one in Durham, there's one in Cumbria. Every local authority have exactly the same thing. It's run on the same lines. And when disasters happen, Storm Desmond is a good example, I look at where we were pre-Storm Desmond for floods and how we reacted to it, and where we are now in terms of preparation for flood incidents. It is light years away. I mean, we're so monumentally better prepared for dealing with a serious flood incident than we were in 2015, 2016 before the 6th of December. So there is much that you can learn on a local level. Now, it's part of the investigations and inquiries is to how can you get better data sharing without changing the law wholesale? Or can you do this only by doing my wholesale legal change? Now, that is a complex policy issue that we need to look at. I think the two bits on resilience I want to try and address, though, is what I would call a national resilience plan and a local resilience plan. And I think Chris Metcalf asked about the disaster response plans across our area and how do they work and what do they do. And I'm going to try and deal with that. And I know that Mike Darrington asked about sort of the national approach. So I'll deal with the local one. And I can tell you, if you've looked at the previous meetings that we've done and some of the communications I put out, I'm absolutely no doubt that we need to have a local resilience plan. And that is super local as well. So what is clear we have at the moment is we have a local resilience forum that has got all the key players. There's no doubt it has. It's got all the key players and it operates as a hub. And as we've discussed, they have anybody who's on the social security visits list, for example. Okay. So if I'm a care package from the county council, I received the, say, 15-minute visit in the morning, etc., etc. Those are the sorts of people the county council are looking at and who are going, we know we've got to visit there. I think there's a whole world of work that needs to be done on a sort of county level on what my GP can share and if a vulnerability list is different, because at the moment the data is not brilliant, if the honest truth is known, and it's not as good sharing in a way that you can possibly do it in terms of household without identifying people, which is a way of doing it. So I know that 43 Acacia Avenue in Bellingham or Stonehalf or wherever, there's a vulnerable person, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. You're going to have to work it out. Now, that is not sharing data that is personal, but it is allowing them to get on with it. There's a way forward on that, and the county council and the various partners are looking at that. So that's sort of what a county need to do. But super local, it is patently clear, and the parish council chair from Great Whittington is saying exactly what the parish council chair in Kielder or Rochester or various other places is saying. We're going to need to have in every single village or community a designated hub, ideally with a landline, clearly with a decent generator, and clearly with the capacity for getting water without electricity and requiring a pump. And then you're in a position that you know whatever else is happening in your community, you know there is one spot where you can charge your phone, where you can get a hot drink, where there is a generator that is going to be able to run things. We organised a generator for Ridsdale, so the gun-in had a capacity to keep going. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is got to be done on that basis. How we pay for it is complicated. So that slightly is above my pay grade, but I've got very strong ideas. I think MPG have to have a role, county council have to have a role. There's what's called members' budget of county councillors, where they have £15,000 a year that they can give to community causes. I'm pretty sure this would come within the ambit. So to address your Great Whittington example of about a 2,000 something pounds example, we're looking at whether those could work. There's a work in progress on that, but the solution is patently obvious. Your parish hall, your village hall, it can even be a pub, is going to have to become that residual centre. And to answer Richard's point, so there's no criticism of us, because personally I think we handled this amazingly. But we're all going to have to get to know our neighbours better, is the simple truth. Because in a particular community, there will be people who are vulnerable in the broadest sense of the word, but don't have a county council care package, but do have people who are ill or who are vulnerable if this is a week-long, I haven't got power situation. And hopefully, that is where parish councillors and county councillors can assist. And hopefully we can drive forward a better system whereby there is someone in the village who actually knows who are the people who are vulnerable in the broadest sense of the word. Now that's a work in progress, and I'm not going to say that we've got it in hand. We're just going to talk about the national stuff.
Can I just
yeah, sure.
comment on the local?
Yeah, sure.
I raised a question about the local disaster.
Yeah.
Chris Metcalf. And it's great to hear that resilience plans are in place and we're thinking about them. But it's not one size fits all. And I know we're talking about Arwen here, but all sorts of other events can happen in the future.
Yeah.
So we've got to be thinking future. For example, if there's a big terrorist event or something like that, then the police would be more involved than probably MPG or whatever. Somebody's got to take leadership for all resilience plans, which I presume is the council, the Northumberland County Council in this case, to lead and to designate what sort of resilience plan needs to be in place for a particular event. And it's that leadership at sort of the top level that I'm worried about isn't there at the moment.
Well, so it's a fair point. Since 2004 in the Civil Contingencies Act, successive governments and successive local authorities have looked at, we've had a disaster, how do we get better? All right, which is, I hope, what all of this is what it's all about. Okay, so there is a lead, and the lead are the police. So in the Local Resilience Forum, the fundamental lead is the police. They can then hand over, as happened in this particular case, to the chief executive, who is the lead civil servant of the county council, and she, in this case, was running the show, and she is the one ordering everybody around and who's effectively in charge. All right, and that's done because, as you rightly say, if it's a terrorist incident, the police should be in charge. If it's a flooding incident, it tends to be Environment Agency, Northumbrian Water tend to be the key players in that. And everybody's in the room though, so there's no question they're all there. The question is then, how do they interact with local communities? Because if I run a parish council, or if I'm a member of parliament helping people whose phone's going, I mean, I have a staff of 6. All they did for 2.5 weeks was this. Answering the phone, trying to get people generators, trying to help people, alerting everybody. The degree of comms is just not good enough. That is patently clear. Partly because everyone's phone's down, and how do we work that going forward? It's a work in progress. I wouldn't say there is a definite fix, but I'm absolutely certain we can get better. And I'll give you one easy example. We had Storm Desmond. I did a meeting in this room 5.5 years ago. I did multiple meetings in Hayden Bridge, Corbridge, all down the valley. And in Storm Desmond, we didn't have any flood groups in real terms beforehand. We had a situation where Kielder Reservoir ran at 99% in the winter. So, of course, what happened on the 6th of December was you get a ginormous storm, it goes into Kielder Reservoir and it goes straight over the top, and you get an awful lot of water coming down. Northumbrian Water and the Environment Agency, we brokered an agreement, and that Kielder Reservoir now runs at about 85–86%. So if you have a really bad storm in the winter, Kielder Reservoir can take what is about 14% of the entirety of the water that goes down the valley is out of the game. So you can act as a giant reservoir in the obvious sense of the word, and no water comes out of Kielder. That makes such a difference to the Upper North Tyne and to everything from Ward downwards. Those sort of measures, how we deal with things, our flood preparation is transformed, and we spend a lot of money on flood defences since. I'm certain we can do this, but it's complicated. I'll come in.
Can I just come in on that?
Make a short. Yeah, I'll let the gentleman come in, and then I'll let you come in, and then I'll make more of the network underground, and it won't blow down. Well, the answer is yes, but I can assure you, plenty of the underground network in Ponteland, for example, failed as well. And there's plenty of other ones that did fail. But I'll let you answer that point, and also come on in, and then I'll come to you, Mike, on national resilience.
Okay, let me address the point about underground cabling. And as the network load grows, with more people with air source heat pumps and more people with EVs, then there is likely to be more cable circuits put in rather than overhead line. However, basically, in terms of the cost effectiveness of the design, the overhead lines as they're currently built cover the rest of the world. The world, this is how it's done. By 25 kilometers of straight overhead line, that's how it's built. Putting it into cable can be between 6 and 10 times more expensive, given the land take, the road crossings, because you can't just throw it in a field. Obviously, you've got to put it underground at the right level and all that. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's between 6 and 10 times more expensive. And where you get is, you just get to the point where you say, if there's some pinch points and you just keep replacing a bit of overhead line with a bit of cable, it's where will the next pinch point be? It gets to a point where current thinking, and there's a regulator, and there'll be a review with design standards and designs of networks. Current thinking is that you can't invest your way out of that problem. There will always be overhead lines. And, this is a 1 in 50-year type of storm. How much do we really all want to pay as a society to have a network which is more resilient? And that discussion will go on. But currently, at where it is, that's the line that it's designed in the most cost-effective basis. Point I was going to make to the gentleman over here on the LRF, if I may, is one of the things that we've learned is we do contact the LRFs, and we're part of them from the Thursday and the Friday leading up to the storm. In our key stakeholders list, we are recruiting, and we've got some on there. We're recruiting people who are prepared to have their name, phone number, etc., to represent a parish council, for example. And we're going to have regular updates with those individuals, so that if the person moves out of the area, they will then elect a new person that will be our direct link. So what we're looking to do is to hold a key stakeholder list. Guy, for example, is on that list, and parish council chairs or bodies such as that, we're going to add to that key stakeholder list, so we can get traffic into our system.
So, I mean, just to build on that point, and to slightly deal with the resilience point. So we didn't used to have a situation where the Environment Agency would go out to parish councils and the flood groups all the way up and down the Tyne Valley. Now they do. They send out written updates. There is a way different engagement than there ever was in terms of the Tyne Valley and the Tyne River than there ever was pre-storm Desmond. This can be done. There's no question. On the underground cabling point, a fair point, well made. Frankly, that's a matter of Ofgem. So that's exactly that. If you can go onto their website and see the terms of reference, they are the independent regulators of energy companies and power companies. And if they take the view that this is what they're going to do, then this is not run by government. These guys can make power companies do whatever they're doing, and they are specifically looking at provision in that particular way. I'm going to finish off on resilience point. I'm going to make one final point, which I should have made earlier. I'll come in on the second, in 1 second, which is in terms of electricity poles. There is an argument raised previously that you should have made the poles stronger, and we should have, you put a ton of cement around it so it doesn't break over. Now, what we are doing, and trust me, there's a lot of pressure on these guys, which is to review their network, because frankly, they lost a lot of poles, but most of those would have gone anyway. Now, there's an argument, well, this one was a bit loose here, or a farmer came to us at the Bellingham meeting and said, you can see it on tape, said I had a rabbit growing around my particular one, I could have pushed it over myself. I'm not totally sure that's right, but you get the principle. So they're definitely doing a review of that. But in more fundamental terms, there is one key thing, which I should have said. So NPG do not have a large store of either generators or poles. That's not going to happen anymore. That's going to change, because if nothing else happens out of this inquiry, self-evidently, they've got to be ready with a warehouse full of electricity poles that they can then access, because it cannot, similarly, they've got to have a warehouse full of a sufficiency of generators that, and all energy companies, in my view, should have this, so that they can then replace the very large power capacity. So there's a generator that we all use in a house, or you can run a farm. The stuff they have, they can insert that and they can run a whole village, frankly, off it. Now, having that capacity at a greater ability and having a storage of that is, in my view, something that's got to be absolutely vital. Right, Mike, I'm going to let you come in on national resilience.
My concern is, as you suggest, Guy, is about the future. I'm Mike Carrington from Slayley, and I've been involved in these sort of things since I moved there about 30 years ago. Slayley has got a checkered history in terms of electricity supply and water supply, and it was handled. It was really bad again this time. We've had many promises to be sorted, but I'm not going to go back about that, because that's history. I'm more concerned to see it doesn't damn well happen again, and I mean that. There's got a guy saying, yes, there'll be more generators and more poles. But hopefully, you alluded to, well, we might be getting one or two more, we might be investing a bit more in sort of having a stockpile. We need a strategic stockpile of generators and poles, many more than anyone would think were necessary, because you've got to be ready for that 100-year event. The second thing is, you've got to actually see you're not proof, your system is not proof against a 75-mile-an-hour wind. It's going to be proof against 100 mile or 120 mile an hour. It's going to be proof that it can take the hurricanes that we promised for the future, because we are promised that we're going to get stronger winds in the future because of global warming. That's what we promised. So therefore, we need to make bigger investment in seeing that it doesn't happen again. And so then if we make sure it is then future-proof, but then we've got strategic stocks of poles and of the generators particularly, then we can, if we do have a few problems, we can get out of it. So, and the trouble is, as has been alluded, the lack of electricity knocks on to water, and electricity and water are really critical. And electricity is going to be more critical because we're not going to be without gas or coal or logs or anything in the future. So we're going to have to live with electricity. So we must have it. And so the pressure's got to be on NPG and the generators and government to make sure that they put their money where their mouth is and don't just do all the nice green things. They make sure that we can supply stuff properly. And that is absolutely essential. I'd be interested to hear what your organisation, you can't probably speak with the authority, because it's a big investment we're talking about. It's not just, let's get a few more generators. We're talking something really big. If that doesn't happen, then we will not have electricity when the gales come and the storms come, and when we're all dependent on it. And our electric cars, we'll all be stuck where we are. We might be able to work in our electric cars.
All right, that point well made.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And with respect, you've hit the nail on the head of the main issues in the story. I mean, if we just say what happened, we replaced 775 poles in 9 days. And so we had them. We had them in stores, and we were bringing them from other DMO areas when we needed them. So it was a catastrophic storm for us, a 1 in 50 year appearance. 775 wood poles were replaced inside 9 days. In terms of generators, the route that we take is that the generators in storage. It sounds like a great idea, and it's something that's definitely being looked at. But the thing about generators are they're machines that need running and need oil and need to be maintained. So you can't lock a 1,500 generators in this room and leave them for 10 years. They won't run when you get them back out.
No,
so we hire.
We had in the business I ran, we used to have generators all around our premises around the country.
Yes.
And they had to be fired up once a week.
Yes.
Make sure they were turned over.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Make sure that they had the fuel there. To make sure they were working well. And that was done on a totally regular basis. Otherwise, we knew perfectly well when we needed them, they wouldn't work.
Absolutely.
And that's what happened in slavery. There was one for our water supplies. In our water supplies, the water didn't come up because the generator couldn't get started. Then there wasn't enough fuel in it to go on. And then they discovered, there's another pumping station at Seal Hall where there's no generator. And so, of course, if the water doesn't come through Seal Hall, it doesn't get down to the main pumping station, so we didn't get the water. So the water supply was on and off like it was over.
I'm going to let him try and answer it. Can I make the point? I'm going to come to you both, don't worry. I cannot overstate your argument on generator storage has got no traction at all.
No.
You might as well pack up and go home right now if you think genuinely you're not going to have a generator storage thing. Because trust me, government or Ofgem is going to address that. There's no prospect. If a business and all of the other public sector businesses are having to do this, as Mike says, having run Greg's, then it's perfectly doable. You are going to have to employ a man to service generators, and after 3 years, you probably have to change them and sell them off. And there's a whole bunch of logistics about that, which is not simple. I'm sorry, Rick, I will come to your apologies. But that has got to be addressed. Do you want to address the first point? I'll let these two ladies and gentlemen come in briefly as well, and then I will come to Rick.
I totally get the idea, and it will be looked into about how many generators we can have. But in that week, we hired and then put in place 330 machines. That's how many we had. And these were quite big machines because we were lighting up hamlets, not individual properties. We did have some for individual properties, but we were lighting up hamlets with these generators. We had 330 on the network in that week. And we bring them in, we have agreements with hire companies that have them, and they'll be driven up and down the country through the night to hit our requirements in that week. And could we do better? I'm sure we could, and it's being looked at, but the answer, as we see it at the moment, is not to have a warehouse full of machines that sit there or need maintenance. but it will be looked at because everything's being looked at. But the point I would bring you on to is, and one of the reasons why Ian Miller's with us from Innovation, is that we're looking at, in Northumberland in particular, innovation projects for the future called resilience, micro-resilience project, which will use local batteries that will be topped up locally and have probably, say, 2 to 3 days supply on to get people out of a problem. And then that would be the place that we drive the generator to when the fault happens. So we're looking at building them into our network as a trial at the moment. And if anybody's interested in the room, talk to me and he'll give you an understanding of what we're doing in the future.
I'm conscious we've only got about 20 minutes, so I'll take the lady here and the gentleman there relatively quickly, but not, I'm not going to cut you off, but it's relatively quickly.
Okay. So the point I wanted to raise mainly was when you were saying this is a 1 in 50 year event, it's not necessarily going to be that going forward. We are in an unprecedented period of change in just about every area of life, but certainly with the climate and everything else, we don't know what's around the corner. So you're going to have to be prepared that it's going to probably be more than once every 50 years that you're going to have to deal with something like this. But also, I'm from Slurley as well, and by day 7, we were pretty much at the end of our tether, freezing, no hot food and everything else. So we tried to hire a generator. There were none to be hired because they'd all been snapped up earlier than that. We tried to buy one. We couldn't even find one to buy. We had to travel an hour to Sunderland actually to buy a generator, and that was £700 because it was the only one we could find that was ready, that was there to take that day. We were in a position where we were able to spend that money, not that we wanted to, and not that we, it was an expense we could have done without, but we were in a position to do that. Other people wouldn't have been. And we had to buy a generator that was bigger than really we wanted to, because that was the only one that was available, and we just couldn't stand it anymore, and we didn't have any reassurance about when the power was coming back on at that point.
Your story is not on its own. Plenty of other people that come forward with that argument, I can assure you that tale. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Malcolm Kemp. We live on the edge of Hexham, and we were without power for 10 days. And our power was restored by a team from the southwest, near Gloucester. Lovely men. When they had been on the road for 10 days already, they got to us, and they told us how shocked they were when they got to Northern Power Grid's territory. 2 things shocked them. Shambolic organisation. The one crew told us that it had been sent out 3 times to repair something, only to find when they got there it had already been done by somebody else. There was significant waste of resources in connecting people back up. If there had not been that waste of resources, other people would have got connected more quickly. The other thing that shocked them was the state of maintenance of NPG infrastructure. To get our power back on our pole, they had to take a chainsaw to the ivy on the pole to clear the ivy off the electricity wires before they could start to reconnect it. It was the state of the infrastructure that actually caused our power loss, not Storm Arwen. If the infrastructure had been maintained, we would have had power all the way through.
So let me just deal with pole maintenance, for want of a better expression. I'm not sure that is a thing that actually exists. What has come through is that, the Bellington farmer who said that the rabbits were eating his particular pole, and he tried to complain about it and hadn't got a call out. There is a whole bunch of things that this company and other companies are going to have to do in terms of auditing, bluntly, and actually going to have a look at the infrastructure they've got. There's no question on that. Now, slightly, we're all going to get much better at reporting these things in, because obviously there's an awful lot of stuff they've got to go and have a look at. But at the same stage, that's got to change. In terms of, as you rightly say, regional people coming around, no question that we took everybody that we possibly could. And that's what the new SEC system does. Paul, do you want to answer that particular point?
Well,
briefly?
I'll bring Matt. Can I bring Matt in? Because I think it's useful rather than hearing from me all the time. This is Matt Preston, who's the retail manager.
Yeah, so evening everyone. First thing I want to say is just offer an apology. Obviously, I've heard a lot of distress. This is our 3rd one we've been to now, so personal apology from me. So I understand the distress and everything that was caused. In terms of the operation, I was responsible for that. So as we've already heard, we brought in 277 individuals from across the country. So NewSAC effectively stands for North East South West, and it's a mutual aid agreement. So that worked well. What we did do, we packaged up the jobs. The way we build the network, we build it top down. So we take electricity from the transmission company, which is National Grid, 132,000 volts. We then distribute that through to everyone's individual property. So we have to rebuild the network up, starting with the high voltage network first, and then we move on to the low voltage network. The reason we do that, we start with the low voltage network, and it's a fault on the high voltage network, the electricity still won't flow. So I've got one of my colleagues here, Graham, who's part of my team. So we packaged up the work for our own staff, all the contractors that came on board. But what we did find, sometimes with our own staff, but certainly with the contractors, is when they were driving through the villages, driving through the hamlets, driving through the towns, there was that much damage. Some of these guys were repairing the assets as they were going. So to answer your point, when we sent someone out a couple of days later to a fault that we thought was still in the system, actually it might have been repaired a couple of days prior. So unfortunately that couldn't be helped. In terms of the state of the assets, we have a very strict asset management regime. So we inspect our assets on regular cycles. So if you take the overhead network as a good example, we carry out a physical foot patrol of every single asset on a 10-year cycle. So we will visit every single pole. We have a visual inspection of that.
Matt, what's the lifespan for a pole in this latitude?
It depends, is the answer. It depends on the environmental situation.
We have some evidence of rotten poles that are blown over. So
Yes, you will.
think that we share those with you.
Because the whole of the network, we've got 550,000 poles on the network.
Yeah.
775 went off.
Yeah.
We've done some testing on it. 25% were what would be described as A1 condition. And yes, there are different conditions of poles. People will remember that the electricity network in sparse Northumberland villages was built in the 50s. And we speak to somebody in Belgium who could remember it being built. And he says it's the same pole. So don't be surprised that poles last 60 to 70 years in some cases. In some cases they don't. They blow over and they get cracked in half. I've got some photographs here of some of the poles, if you want to see it. So it depends, but 50 years is not a long time.
I think the point I would make is for all of us who aren't electrical linesmen, are not specialist engineers, I have to say we all think 10 years is an awful long time because a lot of ivy can grow in 10 years. Rabbits can attack stuff. I know what I'm going to be I know what I'm going to be recommending to Ofgem, and that cycle has got to get a lot quicker. There's no question about it.
What we'll say, Guy, that's a physical foot patrol.
Yeah.
What we also carry every 2 years is a helicopter patrol. So we fly out.
A helicopter is not going to spot ivy.
I mean, most spot ivy, but what it does identify is weak points on the network. So we use thermal imaging, etc., etc. So we do have a robust regime. What Paul was referring to on the health indices, the highest health indices, 25% of those assets fail. And some of these were almost brand new builds. So that's the strength of the strongest.
I'm not here to defend MPG. There is no doubt that brand new poles were blown over. But there's also no doubt that some old ones were done. Grab a seat because I've only got about 18 minutes because it's not fair on the people who run the mart. They've got to wrap up and do other things as well. And I do want to deal with some points. Matt, I'm going to come back to you, don't worry. But I want Rick needs to come in. I do want to deal with the MPG come back on water as well in particular. But I just want to say one point on climate. So he's not here tonight, but there were at the last meeting in Bellingham, you can watch it. There were two linesmen, as the technical term, which we're all learning an awful lot about electricity now. There were two linesmen who worked for over 40 years for MPG and previous companies who were super local. None of them had ever seen a storm like it. There's no question whatsoever. Now, that does not mean that there won't be a similar storm coming forward. And there's a legitimate argument about, is climate change causing this? Is this I think you'll find the inquiries will show that this is not a climate change related storm. We can't be certain about that, but this is just a massive wind event, frankly, from a direction that is where things were not really ready to take it. And a lot of the trees, you speak to Forestry England, there's no question, Forestry England would say this is a very, very different type of storm. Now, that's for future assessment, but clearly we're all going to need to be in that trip for the future. I'm going to Rick briefly, and I'm going to get, I really want to get MPG and Northern River Water as well. Sorry,
I'll just be very brief to answer two of the questions from a question on the plan. Yes, there is a plan. The details are on your seat. It gets constantly reviewed. It's kept by the county council. We have a civil contingencies team, and they pull together all the various partners' contributions to that plan. But it's constantly reviewed. And apart from the various reviews into the event that Guy has mentioned, we've already had a 2-day wash-up looking at the council and the partnership's response to this. It's not what happened with the pylons or anything, it's how did we respond within the community. And we're going to learn the lessons from that, and the plan will be revised on that basis as well. What did we get right, what did we get wrong? Which goes to, was it Richard's point? I'm disappointed that we didn't get to some of the people you've been talking to. In the last 2 days of the event, we visited 5,380 households.
Yeah, but the
Knocked on
20,000
the
now,
door.
so
And that was then.
Then finish then.
But obviously we've missed some people, and this comes back down to the data. And when we, as part of the wash-up, when we looked across the county, in some areas we had the parish council or the county councillor or the local parish council were phoning up and telling us about the people we didn't know. When we got those calls, we got straight out and we sent somebody out. So we need that better network in the community. We are looking at setting up those community resource hubs driven by the county council with that network of contacts around them. So next time this happens, if it does happen, hopefully it won't, not in any of our lifetimes anyway. When we get into that control room, our data will be that much better. Our list of vulnerable people will be that much better, as Guy said, with GDPR.
I just want to tell them one thing.
No, Richard, I'm not. No, I want to. You can go and come in on later on. There's a lot of people who need to hear, and we haven't heard from all, so I really want to deal with that because there's several people who've come who really want to hear from that. I'll just make the point. There's a reason I need to wrap up by 8 is because the Mart have got to start unpacking all of this, and I also want to allow several people to actually sit down with the team at the back. And if they've got individual water concerns, they can sit down, and you can sit down with Rick and the county council as well. All right. So there will be people who'll do follow up, but there is a process to wrapping this up. We've rented this, and there are nice people who also have given up a lot of time to look after us. So, Ross, are you going to do water, or who's going to be the specialist on water?
Are we doing Slaley?
Slaley in particular. Do you want to stand up so everyone can see you? Whichever one you want to do that.
Basically, I've probably not one or two years, certainly Mike, I speak to Mike quite a bit. Slaley, yeah, in the past, I have had some issues with the pumps. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. I worked with Mike quite a lot with that. That was an issue where the pumps were airlocking a lot. We managed to rectify that issue, change pipe work, change pumps, better pumps which are work on a negative suction on a lower pressure. Anyway, the storm came on Friday evening. We do have a standby generator at the work here. It starts automatically. It runs. What happens when the power goes off, the pumps stop, obviously you go without water. You live at Slaley at the top of the hill. Basically, the pumps are at the work here. I don't know if you know where that is. It's at the bottom of the hill and what we back towards the hole. So when the pumps do restart on what we call a soft start, so that it takes a long time to charge the network up because basically we're working on hydraulics. It's totally different to electric where you can flip the switch, put the power on. You've got to do it in a slow manner because what happens if there's air in the network, it's got to get out on it through a cord through air valves and air release. If it's in an instant start at hydraulics and network, it'll burst the mains, and also what we're doing, it'll probably burst your private supplies to see the problems. So yeah, so the pumps did start on the generator. Unfortunately, our generator, the tank only lasted about 12 hours. It was a weekend, so everyone was in it slowly due to the storm. So we did run out of diesel. The reason why we weren't aware of it is because we lost our comm system, and that was throughout the northeast, similar to the Northern Power Grid. You know, one, we couldn't get calls coming in, but two, our control room could not see what was pumping. We couldn't see levels in reservoirs, and that was from Berwick right the way through our whole network. So what happened, our generator did run out, and usually it alarms straight away. I've put a system on it now where if the generator gets to a quarter full, it fires an alarm through our SCADA system. So it goes to the control room, which is operated 24/7. They fire that alarm out, the duty standby lad, then we can rectify that, because when it's about a quarter full, you've still got 3 or 4 hours worth of pumping. So generally, we would have got that sorted. Unfortunately, we're running blind, so the generator went off. I spoke to Mike on the Saturday night, he rang us up personally. So we got someone out there. Unfortunately, we didn't have the Bowser. The Bowser was up in Berwick at the time. So we managed to get enough diesel and jerry cans to get us away. It went up again. But what we did do was set up, because we thought the power was going to come on relatively quickly. It didn't. Lower Care, for example, I think Lower Care pumps were on generator for about 7 or 8 days. So what we had to do, and we had to do this in the whole of the northeast from Berwick, we had deal right down at Durham. We had to set up a team of lads with houses, so that was going 24/7. So, it's really, we're filling up twice a day. Once we get the hang of it, we're more than we've got it. So yeah, it's probably a bit of a quirky system. It does work, but unfortunately our tank's not big enough for what's happening at the storm. So what we're thinking about doing, one, to put a bigger tank there. We could do that, or we need to think about it in the bigger picture, because Sleary's not unique. It's all the Tynedale, for example. To get water at Allendale, it's got to go through 5 sets of pumps. To get there, Sleary's got to go through 4 sets of pumps. So obviously the whole network's down, so a lot of generators. So we do have a lot of fixed generators, we do have a lot of mobile generators. So if the Sleary, what we're thinking, do we need a bigger diesel tank, or do we deploy like mobile bonded tanks? Or probably in Sleary, what I'm thinking about is what we should maybe get a better generator, a newer generator, but with a bigger tank, and it's all encapsulated in one, rather than trying to move mobile things, And this is what we're looking at throughout the whole of the network. We've never had anything like this. Like Storm Desmond, we were flooded, but certainly the power, we were running blind, and we really were having to rely on calls coming in, and obviously people couldn't make them calls because of the phone network with them. So yeah, it was challenging for us, and we really are looking at how we can work together and how we work as a business to get over this. So I hope that's answered your questions. If you want to come and see us at the end, please come over and see us.
I'm going to take the gentleman in the green shirt. Yes, you sir, because you haven't asked a question. Yeah.
Tom Richardson, NFU, Northumberland County Chairman. I'd just like to go to the councilman and just say, I don't think 120 soldiers on the ground is enough. You could lose 120 soldiers in Hexham and we wouldn't see them. When's a major incident alerted? When does the government take steps to put in more people on the ground? We've just heard about diesel Bowsers. I'm sure the Army have got a few diesel Bowsers down at Catterick. The other thing I'd like to say is the water boards. What happens when your power doesn't work? Surely you don't allow raw sewage into the water. What's your backup plans for that?
Okay, so a number of different questions. Let me just try and address those. Better resilience plans going forward. Part of all the investigations we're trying to do. Many things that we're looking at. I think it's fair. There's a fundamental point that every single organisation, doesn't matter who you represent, is going to look at alternative power supply. Patently obvious that it doesn't matter whether you're looking after Northumbrian Water or a parish council hall, or you're looking after MPG or the Forestry England. It doesn't matter who. They're all looking at how do we get backup power, and that is a utterly key thing that we're trying to look at. The MPG people say generators may not be the thing. You may want to look at batteries, and there's a capacity of that. In terms of who runs the show and how you call the army in, and does the government can ride to the rescue? Well, so I would clearly represent the government, so obviously everything you do is perfect. Not, I accept that. But it isn't actually, frankly, successive governments. So the whole point about the Civil Contingencies Act, right? And you can go and have a look at it, have a look at the plan that Northumberland has. Pretty much every part of the UK have the same plan, all right? They do vary it, because if you're in a really mountainous part of Scotland or whatever, as compared to central London, there's clearly a difference. But in broad terms, the structure is the same. And then after every incident, you go away and do the learning lessons point. The central government can't do a lot, because the simple point is you need qualified linesmen, all right? If you have a flood, you need to try and get rid of the flood router somehow. And central government can come in and do stuff. In terms of soldiers, Rick made the point very fairly. If I had 150 linesmen who are able to work on high-powered, very, very dangerous pieces of electricity kit, and they also have the foresters next door to them, you might be able to use them. They just simply don't exist. There is a separate issue, and I was at Albemarle Barracks today, sitting down with the commanding officer and all the people there, of how it is you can utilise local military resource. Because obviously the 3 RHA, who are based at Albemarle, were not the ones called in, even though large parts of Ponteland were down, and significant parts of Ingo, just around the corner, were down just 2 miles away from where Albemarle is. In fact, the troops came up from Yorkshire, sort of Catterick way, basically. There is a really difficult thing on calling in the army, though, and trust me, the army are extremely, I'll put it politely, robust before they say, look, we're not an emergency service, we're not here, we're here to protect you, and we need to focus on a core function, and it has to be there's a very clear chain of command, and they are very precious about saying, you can just use 500 squaddies to go and do this, this, and this. And there's a bunch of insurance issues and a bunch of health and safety issues when you're dealing with power cables and things like that, that you've got to be very careful of. So I'm not there to defend that process, but trust me, there is a really detailed process. And the army, and I think rightly so, and I will defend them on this, they take it very seriously before they say, okay, we will step in. Because it is not their job, frankly. It is the job of MPG, it's the job of the local resilience board.
But they could have taken water to stock that was out of water.
Oh, well, so that's a separate issue. So the answer,
it's an very
so the reason for that, let's be blunt, and as you know, when the NFU were ultimately, Adam and myself were talking on a regular basis, the simple problem is that nobody knew when the power was coming back on, which goes back to the 24-hour point. MPG repeatedly said that basically, don't worry, you'll be on in 24 hours. Because everybody relied upon that to start with, time ticked on, and suddenly you're 4, 5, 6 days in, and the 24 hours has repeatedly happened. And that happens to individual people living at number 43 to, I run a farm in the West Allen Valley, and I've got 100 head of cattle that I've got to get water to, and the water's packed up. That is the comms is the key problem here, because basically MPG messed up on that. Now, trust me, we have all made that point very, very robustly, because you rely upon the electricity company to say, when is it coming back on? And all decisions flow from that. And the reality is, when we knew that the extent of the plot, so not we, when the local resilience forum grasped that this was going to take a lot longer than we all thought, then extra steps were made. There is a sort of wider issue, is whether we have enough linesmen in this country, because even if you bring everybody in, you're still short of people. And there's a whole bunch of issues that you have to have Forestry England, very well-trained foresters and people to chop down the trees. You just can't, we're still, as you know, we've lost nearly 1 million trees in this area. There's still a world of problems on an ongoing basis, particularly up Kielder way. So, I mean, there's a bunch of other stuff that we can address. Rick, do you want to come back on that one particular point? I'm conscious that we're in our last few minutes, so briefly, please.
Not yet. I mean, there's a cascade, if you like, of action that started out. I think, Paul, MPG actually did declare a major incident on the first night, which is why they mobilised hundreds of people from all around the country. SCG, the control group, I chaired it the day before the major incident. And we took soundings from MPG and Northumbrian Water, and we felt at that point the situation was under control because we thought everything would be back on within 2 days. The following morning, we realised it wasn't, and we knew then what we needed the army to do, which was to get out more boots on the ground to hit the people who were tipping into vulnerability, to use Richard's phrase. So that's why we had a specific thing that we wanted the army to do. Before that, we didn't have something specific to ask them. We made the request that goes through the military command up to the Minister of Defence, who says yes. Government say yes, and they were already planning by then, because we expected it to be accepted. We got 120 from the Strategic Reserve Battalion came up from Catterick Hill. Yeah, and that's what we needed. And we stood them down when the power started to come back on. We didn't need them anymore.
So there is and there's different types of crisis when they can do different types of things. So in a flood, They are very, very, very helpful because getting a bunch of fit young lads to pick up an awful lot of sandbags and help, there is an established protocol. We're going to have to get better about how it is and who is the reserve battalion and things like that. You can't just pluck them though from operational duties. You know, bear in mind there's a whole bunch of others went to Durham, a whole bunch of others went to North East Scotland, some went to Cumbria. By that stage, there's quite a lot of people involved. I'm going to cut that argument short. You can raise it further in a minute if you don't mind. I'm sorry to cut you short, but we're really late, and I promised I'd be free end by 8.
I am ex-military, so I understand all that and I appreciate what the army did. However, you're saying you put people out there. We are hill farmers, okay? We were cut off for 4 days because of snow. We had no contact right up until the day the power came back on, which was a week later. The army was sent out, we believe, never appeared, we never saw them, but yet we have people who live in Hexham who had the army knocking on their door asking, what can we do for you? They did not, where were they? You know, my husband is a farmer, a farming family. They were out clearing roads, they were out pulling trees down so that they could continue. We have no help for generators because we couldn't get in touch with anybody. We have cows that were dependent, that were inside barns, that were dependent on an air filtration system. With 6 days without it, we run the risk of, the cows could get pneumonia. But the army, who sent, the question I want to ask here is, who decides where the army gets sent? Because why send them into Hexham on foot, knocking on doors, saying, what can we do for you? And my friend actually said, you want to go up the road 10 miles and see where the help's being needed. Sorry.
Well, what's happened has happened. That's awful, I agree. But it should be better. But the point is, unless we make this thing more, I'm really disappointed with the poor responses. Because it sounds like you're just trying to give us promise off with a few generators and a better website, a little bit better communications, and everything will be better. And with a bit of that, there won't be another storm before he retires. So that's not, the business is owned by Warren Buffett, who's got a monopoly situation. And that is not satisfactory. Warren Buffett is going to have to accept much lower profits from here for a few years, many years, while he reinvests in getting a good, strong, robust system that will stand up to 120 mile an hour winds, not maybe if we're lucky 75 mile an hour. That investment, if we get that investment, then we won't have all these problems. The water will run, we'll get the water because it won't be get regularly cut off by the electricity.
So that's
what's got to happen.
Well, so you're saying, why do you think we're holding these meetings? Which is the
whole, but just
all right, Mike, hang on a second. Mike,
he was fobbing us off. You really were. He was sent
all right.
Try and quieten them down.
Well, the fair point is this: is that we are feeding in our views, your views, all this community's views to Ofgem, who hold the energy companies to account. They are independent of government. They regulate them. They can require investment in a different way. Exact point that you're talking about. Okay, so and no disrespect to Paul, and don't mean it in any bad way. He's a bit of an irrelevancy here because ultimately it is Ofgem who will decide how it is they are going to regulate and change the way in which these energy companies, and it's not just Northern Power Grid, it's all the other Scottish and Southern in Aberdeenshire, it's the ones in Cumbria who are different. There are 3 different energy companies who are subject to the same inquiry. And they are owned by different people in different ways. And that, to be fair, one of the reasons we're holding these public meetings is so that your views are conveyed to these people and the representatives, but also are then fed into Ofgem. All right. So I will take up your particular point. There is a strategic decision made at the local resilience forum as to where people are sent. As we all saw on the telly, in rural County Durham, they were clearly St John's Chapel and up in the hills. In Northumberland, some people definitely were in Hexham. I don't know reason why they were sent to Hexham. I'm 99% sure it would be because they thought, rightly or wrongly, that these people were vulnerable people, and because that is where by and large people were sent to. All right. How that happened, I can't explain individual cases, but genuinely, there is you've got the man who was in charge of it here, but also slightly there's a serious point, which is the whole point about the county council doing a scrutiny committee is exactly to address this point. why on earth did you send somebody, to someone who's perfectly healthy, to knock on the door with not a very helpful suggestion? And in some cases, as we know, they turned up without water. You know, that sort of stuff is how we get better at this. I'm going to pause it there. If I haven't dealt with your question, my apologies. If you haven't got compensation or have got issues, please go and see the dream team at the back. You don't have to. If you've got to run away and get home to kids or whatever, you can by all means contact through my office. Trust me, we are continuing to do this on an ongoing basis. If you're a glutton for punishment and you want to come and hear this again and raise your point because you didn't necessarily think you've got home enough, come to Allendale tomorrow night at 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. We will be doing the same thing. It's not, this sort of evening doesn't just happen. So I'm exceptionally grateful to my team who do the organising, and also more particularly to, you've got 4 people from Northumbrian Water, you've got 6 people here from Northern Power Grid, you've got someone from the County Council. They're all coming out to listen to you, put it bluntly. You may not have been happy with the reply, but they've all given up their evenings. And obviously they love spending Thursdays and Fridays with me, as you can imagine. But seriously, they all live and work in the same communities you do. All of these people are local, all of them have got the same problems. Lots of them are off power and water and things like that. We are all collectively trying to solve this. Can I just finish on 2 final points? Please leave in a COVID safe way, try not to chat to each other too close. But the most important thing is, please chat to your neighbours, all right? And please chat to your families and come up with localised solutions, which you are already beginning to do. There are some great examples of local communities who are already going, I don't need government to solve this, I don't need a power company to solve this, I need to do some things, but we can actually get a better system in our parish council and our community. And the more we get better examples of that, please let me know. And lots of people are doing it. I've got about 5 different parish councils who already are working on this. NFU are already sharing data on farms and things like that. There's a lot of stuff already happening. But again, my door is open. We are making a series of submissions. If at the end of this you think, well, I really want to get my views into Ofgem, you can go to my website, you can see how you can report those things in. You can also email or write to me, and we will do a submission, which I will also put on my website so you can all see, and I'm going to brief the grant and all those other sort of organisations. Can I just finish by saying thank you to all of you. I realise you love spending Thursday nights sitting in the mark. We think this is a process that is really worth doing, but it only happens if all of you get engaged, and we all try and fix the problem, both collectively and through the agencies that we've always got. I really appreciate it. Please travel home safely, get in touch. If you've got specific local issues, head back there. And by all means, the guys from MPG, County Council and Northumbrian Water will stick around if you've got specific questions for them. Thank you very much indeed.